Hey guys, welcome back to the Well Said podcast. My name is Andre, and I'm here again to talk about what it means to follow Jesus in a post-Christian culture. And today's episode is kind of fun because I get to sit down with a guest and talk about how the gospel has influenced his life and how it's actually bleeding into his work and his place in the society and the community, and how our connection and our faith in Jesus translates into the everyday work that we do. So I'm excited to talk about it today. So welcome to the show, Serge.
Hey.
And can you pronounce your last name for me?
Kutrovski.
Kutrovski.
Yeah.
Because like a fellow Russian, I can read it, but there's different ways that we pronounce, like Bulanov. I'm Bulanov or Bulanov. So
Yeah.
Kutrovski. Serge, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so we're gonna, in a bit, I want to dive into hear all about Mirror Coffee Roasters and all that stuff. But before that, give us a little background about yourself, where you grew up, family, culture, church, that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. Well, immigrated to the United States when I was 2 from, Soviet Union. Now it's Estonia, Narva, but still hold to the Russian culture. My parents, Russian, Ukrainian. So
is it Russian or is it Ukrainian? Because some people like to make that distinction, right?
Well, my mom speaks fluent Russian, but she was born in Donetsk.
Okay.
So technically in Ukraine, but with the Soviet influence, like it all was one.
Right.
Same thing, like I don't call myself Estonian.
Yeah.
But I was born in Narva, Estonia. So yeah, we immigrated and lived in Massachusetts for a while. It was just quite the miracle even getting there, because our visas were like a lottery. We're basically political refugees trying to get in to the United States, and had a sponsorship program that brought us in, and we lived in a church basement for a while.
Wow.
And it was quite interesting for my parents. One, the culture shock, they're dealing with so much change, and also like trying to figure out like, okay, what are they going to build and create, and how are they going to raise their family in America?
Right.
So after a while, they heard about a Slavic movement heading up the west coast of the United States, and they heard that it landed in Bellingham, Washington. So my parents being the pioneers and the adventurers they are, and my mom being a gypsy, gypsies don't stay in the same place.
They're mobile.
Exactly. Nice. So we packed our bags, and we had, I forget the model, but it was one interesting Cadillac.
Nice.
Isn't that weird, right?
Nice. Yeah, a Russian family in a Cadillac.
In a Cadillac, exactly. Cross country.
Awesome.
Got to north of Bellingham, Washington, in like the Sumas, Maple Falls area. And literally, it was pioneering to the core. We lived in a camp area, like no permanent living in that area. So it was really, really wild. And by that, I mean literally wild.
That's amazing.
There would be like stories of like people are like, man, like don't let your kids out. There's like bears on the street tonight.
Wolves, coyotes.
Yeah, exactly. So wild. But it was quite the journey and super interesting. The Russian community grew and flourished, and churches started getting planted, and I just grew up, I think my high school was like 7 to 9% Russian. So huge Russian community, and very, very family oriented and connected. So that was my growing up influence, with the Russian culture, Russian traditions in the church.
Nice,
for the most part.
How many brothers, sisters?
I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters.
Nice. What you guys? What was home like in terms of like work or calling or creativity? Because I know we'll get into the whole coffee thing, and it's a creative world. It's a sense of calling, and what was work like for you guys growing up?
I think the motive behind work was more about the income and being able to sustain the family. Right. So it wasn't necessarily success driven, but it was like financially driven. So success was more tied around finances. So my dad and my mom, they cared about the most was like, hey, like we want to make sure that you are raised, that you have what you need. They knew that I'm the oldest, so as the oldest child in the family, that it would be harder for me to grow up than, let's say, my younger siblings, because they were a little more established. Income was, flowing in. I mean, my dad, especially in Massachusetts, he worked on a farm for,
wow,
I know, $1 or $2 an hour trying to pull 12-hour days, back in the early 90s. And then when we moved to Washington, both my parents never spoke any English.
Wow.
So that was huge. Like, my dad tried to go to college. It didn't really work out for him. But my dad is also a handyman. Like, he knows how to do everything. Everything from fixing houses to, building houses to fixing cars. Like, he's just good he's smart. He's a smart guy. Very quick thinker.
What did he end up doing here in terms of work?
Yeah, for work, he joined a company that was a wood company in Ferndale.
Gotcha.
And it's pretty well established, known kind of wood company that makes moldings.
Yep.
Started working for them, and he's still working for them. So my dad is a man of commitment.
Yeah.
It's a hard job, but he's persevered, and now he's pretty established there.
Yeah.
And on the side, he did a lot of construction work.
Yeah.
A lot.
We were just talking before we were recording that. Our immigrant community is really safety oriented in terms of economics, right?
Yeah.
And work and creativity is almost something that I feel like, I don't know. I feel like it was almost absent in our immigrant culture in the last 20 years. It was just hold on to your faith. Don't let the worldly influence of the world around get in, and also work really hard and get a safe paying job, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, with that, my example would be like my aunt. She just super talented, super good voice, very musically able, and so is my uncle. But they would never have seen those creative giftings to be a complete source of income.
Right.
Maybe they'll, sell a CD or a tape at church of like worship music.
Right.
But that would be the extent of where it would go. Even though, I mean, honestly, my aunt is like brilliant when it comes to music, like super good voice, like musically able. She's really, really good at that. But because creativity was like secondary, subpar, it's not called serious work, so it was always neglected. I personally wanted to be a photographer, and when I brought that idea to my parents are just like, you're never going to make any money with photography. I'm like,
get a real job first, then do fun things.
Yeah,
right?
That's fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
So in terms of your faith, maybe give me a sketch of how your faith evolved through this journey, because I know all this interconnects, right?
Right. Totally. So grew up pretty conservative. My family has always God was the reason and the priority. One of the major reasons that we moved to the United States because literally my dad felt like God was leading him out of Soviet Russia into the United States. So God was the core, the anchor to everything that I was raised on. Everything from, day-to-day life. Like my family and parents still value the whole idea of gathering together in the morning and praying together to start the day. So those like core traditional values. Like I recited the Lord's Prayer since, I could remember how to talk. Like I don't ever remember not knowing the Lord's Prayer memorized,
That's cool though. And that embeds into your consciousness, right? Like
totally.
In a deep way.
Yeah, totally. So it defined my worldview quite significantly. Like I don't know what it means to grow up and be surrounded around non-God driven or God thinking or a biblical worldview. I don't know that, which there's, blessings to both. Like, there's a pro to not knowing and being protected and always understanding that God is always present. And there's also like cons to the fact, like, I didn't have that maybe like, almost violent transitional, like, the quotable Christian Paul to Saul,
right.
I was a persecutor of Christians and now I'm a believer. Like
it's a boring conversion story.
Yeah.
Although not really, but that's kind of what we think, right?
Yeah, but I would say my initial kind of response to the gospel was quite comical.
Yeah.
I was very young. I don't even, maybe it was 10 or younger, and I was sitting on the couch. I remember this so vividly. It's so strange. Like, it's embedded in my mind. When I'm talking about it right now, I see it as a video, like how it happened. But I'm sitting on the couch. No one's home. My mom is home, but no one else. And I don't know why I stayed from school that day. And my mom was cooking in the kitchen. We had like a separating wall from the living room to the kitchen, so I didn't see her. But I would watch sermons on VHS tapes. And my parents would have sermons.
You're a pious soul.
Yeah. It was just kind of ingrained, in me. I loved it. I loved teaching, and like I saw how that actually was like, I was doing that because out of my desire for how God created me, And I'm watching the sermon, and it was basically, who Jimmy Swagger is?
Yeah.
So it was a Jimmy Swagger sermon dubbed in Russian.
Oh my gosh.
And I had no idea who these preachers. I don't honestly remember what was in the sermon, but what I do remember is I had this like revelation of like, whoa, I'm not good.
Yeah.
It was just simply that. It wasn't even like, oh, I'm this awful person. It was just like, humanity is not perfect.
Yeah.
We're broken. You know what I mean? We have a disease. Like, there's something off. So I had that revelation, and I remember just feeling like overwhelmed by like, I need help. Like, I need Jesus.
Right.
Simply like that. My response was, with that overwhelming sense, was like, I'm going to hide behind the couch and start crying.
Yeah.
And my mom runs into the room. She hears me weeping. She's like, what's wrong? What? There's no one here. Like, what's going on? And I'm like, whatever that's going on that tape, like, that is just hitting me hard right now.
Wow.
And I would always go back to that experience of saying, like, okay, I experienced God in a way that has, like, put me on a projection to always know him. And to always pursue him, and to always grow in my faith.
Right. That's amazing. How old are you?
I want to say it was like in the age of 10.
Wow.
Maybe a little younger.
Cool.
Yeah.
So there was a season, I want to jump to the coffee stuff, but there was a season where you kind of transitioned. So there's a season of your life between this growing up in your Russian church setting and your current life as a coffee enthusiast and entrepreneur, and what made that transition? Because your upbringing was very traditional. Your current lifestyle is not necessarily that, although Christ is still at the center of it all.
Right.
In a really brief nutshell, give us a sketch of how that happened.
Yeah, I had another.
We'll probably have to do a separate episode on it later.
That, yeah. So I had another experience with God that put me in a place of kind of seeking him and asking like, hey, like, I want more. Is this all that I have to life? I was working hard, and
where were you working?
I was actually a medical assistant.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, I was a CNA.
Safe job.
Yeah, safe job, making money. I was really good at it, man. Yeah. Like, all of the patients were like, dude, like, can we get Serge in here? Like, patients loved me. I was just good with people.
Yeah.
And that was like kind of my heart and love, was like, I wanted to be with people and hear their stories. And so the job was good. I was overworking, but I got to a point where I'm like, okay, I need to find out, like, is there more to life than this? And I ran into a few people who were working with Youth with a Mission. Mm-hmm. And the way they talked about God, I was actually dating a girl that was in YWAM. And the way she would share about Jesus to me, it actually frustrated me, but also inspired me.
Yeah.
Because he was so close. He was so personal to her, and I wanted that. So I ended up doing Youth with a Mission, doing a discipleship training school of ministry development, a Bible school, and ended up staying with Youth with a Mission for about 8 years full time. Mm-hmm. And during the end of that, when I transitioned from full time to part time, is when I started working in Indonesia and started working on coffee farms. Okay. And I grew up drinking coffee. I mean, it's the Northwest. It's the Northwest, yeah. Everything from Starbucks, Woods, to even, I was telling you earlier about going to Black Drop during college days.
Yeah,
that was kind of, that was
still
like,
open,
man.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, still open. They're going strong. Yeah. They're definitely the interesting spot in town, and people love it. And they bring in such a dynamic group of people, which is what drew me to Black Drop. Mm-hmm. So I would go to all these coffee shops, and coffee was, in a sense, a staple kind of commodity to my life. Kind of everyday thing, nothing super special, but quite fundamental. But after being in Indonesia and working with just different people groups there, I noticed that coffee is actually kind of foundational. It's like, it's not just a commodity in their life. It's basically their livelihood.
Right.
Like,
it's not like it is for us. It's a luxury.
Yeah.
But for them, it's a different
yeah.
ballgame.
Like, I had numerous conversations like that I would never have been able to have if there wasn't that tying ground of like that common ground of coffee. Like, for example, I was sitting in Indonesia and talking to some leaders in their community who are predominantly Muslim people, and I would sit down over a cup of coffee and talk theology.
That's so cool.
And that coffee, not only were we drinking it, that household, the woman of the household would go and roast it on a pan an hour before we drink it. Wow. And that coffee not only was roasted on the pan in that kitchen, it was grown in their backyard.
Wow.
So coffee was so like important to these people. I was walking on the streets of Indonesia and I was trying to write a book on the people of Indonesia, taking photos, asking questions. And I come up to this guy and I was fumbling for my like recorder because I wanted to record the dialogue so I wouldn't get anything wrong. And he looks at me and he's like, "Man, you Americans." He's like, in Indonesia, we get together over coffee and smokes because, cut the smokes part, but you know what I mean? Yeah. Like that, their fundamental thing was like coffee. And that was a point of revelation to me. Like, if I want to connect with these people in Indonesia, and then it grew to like outside of Indonesia to Southeast Asia, then grew to like the rest of the world, like coffee is a neutral and safe ground for all of this to happen. It truly builds community. Right.
Wow. So you were there on a missions trip initially, not
correct.
So you kind of fell into the calling of coffee by accident, seeing that it's a common ground for missions. How long did you spend there?
In Indonesia, on and off, I would go back and forth for 3 years.
Wow.
So at some point, sometimes I would be there roughly 2 to 3 months, other times a few weeks, but I was establishing a long-term discipleship movement there.
Wow. And so is this still connected to YWAM, or is it now a separate thing?
So technically I was sent out by YWAM, but because Indonesia is the largest Muslim nation in the world, they actually, like, organizations like YWAM are technically illegal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Or technically. So they also draw a threat. So most of the YWAMers there or any kind of mission workers are simply called M's or Y's. Wow. And they're basically just missionaries who really believe in incarnational missions. Instead of bringing some kind of Western structure, they want to basically become like the Indonesian and then spread, the story and the gospel through that.
That's amazing. So you get into this whole thing. Is this when you came back and started to be more interested in working with coffee, lattes in the coffee shop setting? How did that transition happen?
Yeah, so once again, I had like a ton of time where I was just like super conflicted with that idea of like, do I leave clergy, like full-time ministry or ministry, and then go into something that is not really considered a prestigious job, And back to referring to my parents, like for my parents, it was a shock. Like I have everything I need to go to college and get a degree, and I chose to do mission work.
Right.
Where I had to raise my own finances.
Right.
Now leaving mission work, clergy, where I've established 8 years of my career, they're like, "You're going to go work in a coffee shop?"
Right.
Like, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
You're not going to make any money again. And I think at that point is when I was like, man, like this has to be it. If God is not calling me to do this, then it is quite stupid. Like I might as well become a pastor because that's where all my experience has. I had, the education, the experience overseas. Like I could have just taken a role as a youth minister and grew into being a pastor or maybe planting a church.
Right.
Logically.
Right.
But at that point I felt like, man, if I want to reach people where they're at, I have to go to the common ground. And to me, the revelation was like coffee and the coffee shop experience is the common ground.
Right. And so how did that become a passion? Because it seemed, so I follow you on Instagram and all your guys' cool latte competitions. And like, so to you, it has become a passion.
Right.
The actual work has become a passion.
Yes.
How did that transition happen to seeing it as a potential avenue to being a light and actually it becoming also a passion?
Yeah. I think for the most part, it was just experiencing the workflow. Like I had no idea what coffee was. So it wasn't the outside experience that brought me into the coffee community. It was making that choice and saying, I'm going to pursue this and see it. So I stepped into my first coffee shop, never for a job, especially like never pulled a shot of espresso, never steamed any milk, nothing. And the more I saw people do it, the more I practiced it, the more it kind of like sucked me in. I was like, this isn't as easy as people say it is.
Yeah.
And it takes skill. There's an art to it. It's a craft. Like everything from the science of extraction and how espresso is being pulled and developed to making sure your milk isn't hot or cold and that the foam is like nice and spread out, even that microfoam. Like all of those things are so intricate. And they drew me to like basically, I want to learn more about this, and I want to be good at what I do. And I've always, everything I do, I'm like a pretty, I guess, I don't know, type A. Yeah, I didn't want to use that word. Yeah, that's not a positive trait.
Right. Or just really, you try to drive to excel.
Yes.
Maybe an excellentist. Is the next
in
word.
Pursuit of excellence.
Yes, there you go.
That's so
awesome.
Definitely. And, that came out quite evident in coffee. And I would just continue to grow and get better, And today, yesterday when I was pouring lattes, I'm like, man, I have so far to go to be better at what I do. Everything from the, minor things. Like latte art isn't crucial to coffee. It just looks good and it's artistic. But everything, from dialing in espresso and how to make it taste better and to basic like batch brew extraction and how filtered coffee is extracted. All of these things are so complex and I'm always pursuing excellence in that, but also wanting to grow and understand what I'm doing.
Right. No, yeah, I think for me, it's been this really cool process of the more we learn about God in the Bible, the more we realize that God is, in a sense, an insane perfectionist. If you look at, you look at the solar systems and galaxies, and then you zoom into the life inside a single human cell, and down to the atomic level, like all of creation is a delicate, intricate dance. Like it's an amazing, perfectionistic work of art that God is doing, and he's doing a lot of it, and we're not even like, none of us are seeing what's going on the ocean floor hundreds of feet below the surface. He's still doing all those amazing miracles. He's still performing intricate works of art every single day. Like God is in the details. He cares about beauty, and beauty is everywhere because he is everywhere working.
Right. Totally.
So learning to develop that sense of wonder and to see the beauty in every kind of trade, it's a huge component to taking our faith right to where we work, to see that this is not just something that there isn't this sacred secular divide where totally. I go do my Sunday thing and then I just do everyday life. So tell us about Mirror Coffee Roasters. So this is all leading into the story, and this is kind of like where we are now.
Yeah. So the idea came when I recently moved back to Washington State. I was living in Florida with doing all the YWAM stuff and started my coffee work in Florida. Worked for a roasting company there. So cool. I worked for a couple roasters and got introduced to roasting. And the idea that roasting coffee is, in my opinion, this is completely subjective to my worldview.
And you are entitled to your opinion.
Right.
For sure.
So in my opinion, like coffee has everything in it. And it's simply our job to pull out what's already there. Mm-hmm. To me, that's the gospel. Huh. God has done everything for us already. Mm-hmm. We're just growing in revelation of what he's done. Mm-hmm. So the whole aspect of roasting coffee is, to me, very spiritual and mystical, because what I'm trying to do, I'm not trying to create, I'm not trying to add anything there. I'm just trying to use fire, which is another fun simile,
right,
to bring out all the goodies,
right,
to kill off stuff that we don't want to taste in a cup, but to also to balance it out with the sweetness, the complexity of the acidity in the coffee. Those things are so volatile that if you add a little too much fire, you'll burn them out. If you don't add enough fire, you won't get the sweetness. And that intricate kind of like mystical experience with coffee is what pushed me to share this with my brother Mark and be like, hey, I have this idea. And part of that, like you were saying, like the whole idea of a dance, like God works in this flow, everything I experienced in YWAM inspired me to also continue my work with people.
Right.
Or to get even more specific, overseas work. Coffee, once again, is a overseas product. We don't go coffee in the United States, at least not enough to produce. There's some stuff happening in California, but we're still not there where coffee is not produced in the United States. So my tie with Indonesia, I saw that their connection with coffee was also deep and mystical. And my connection in coffee is the same. And I wanted to bridge that gap. So that idea in the story of like, okay, I see the work there. I want to impact those people because those people see value in coffee. And I want to show the people how valuable they are through creating a long-term relationship, not just buying a product and walking away and being like, see you later, but creating that one-on-one farm relationship, impacting them, educating them, helping them, one, not only increase the quality of life for them personally, but also to create a product that now increases and elevates the quality of life to the consumer. Firsthand, like coffee shops, Makeworth, Black Drop. Like the better the quality of coffee, the more elevated the experience of the consumer is.
Right.
So that's what drew me and then my brother Mark into that pursuit of saying, man, we want coffee not only to reflect what we are passionate about, but we want to reflect the farmer's passion and heart growing. And we want to make sure that our finances, everything we invest, our time, is going towards those people to also create their livelihood to be elevated as well as the consumer and us.
That's amazing. So how is that, how do you envision that relationship with the farmers, and how do you envision, because I'm assuming that not all coffee companies care about the life of the farmer, the well-being of indigenous people there, right? How is it different for you guys? How is that relationship going to look like?
Yeah, so in the coffee industry, the big talk right now is sustainability. How do we make sure that coffee is sustainable? And some people are saying, man, let's just pay more for coffee. And some people are saying, well, that's not necessary. You know what I mean? We need to do other things. My opinion is we have to do more than just one thing. Paying a fair wage is vital. But knowing where that fair wage is going is crucial.
Right.
Like we have to know that when we buy green coffee and we look at the international market, that the finances aren't simply going to an importing company or a co-op, that the finances are going back into the farm and then not only paying the farmers, but establishing a long-term vision for that farm.
Right.
So my example is in Indonesia. I'm not going to say this guy's name because he lives there. But in Indonesia, I have a friend who I discipled, mentored. We've been friends for a long time. I mean, I think 6 or 7 years now. He's worked in Indonesia for close to 5 years now.
Okay.
He's about to get married to an Indonesian.
Wow.
Super committed. He's all in. Like, that's his life. He is working at the raw state, like at the very beginning. He's planting coffee, growing coffee, processing coffee, roasting coffee, and exporting coffee. So he is my
Is this
trusted...
guy American, or is he Russian, or
he's American.
He's from the West. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I met him in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
He was with Youth with a Mission. We worked together. Man, I just want to name drop so bad because he's a beautiful guy. He's so awesome. Like, he's just such a good soul, such a good heart. And I can trust him because I know his love for Indonesian people. Mm-hmm. Like, I think what Mir Coffee Roasters has is something that I don't know of any other roasting company that has that close of connection to the actual farm. If my guy there ever mistreated an Indonesian, I would be completely shocked.
Right.
Because I know him and I know his heart. Yeah. So for me to pay him even a little bit extra, I know that money isn't simply going to his pocket, but because of his heart, that money is going to go back into the farm, back to the Indonesian people. And not only is his heart to like make sure they have a good livelihood, he cares about their full and complete well-being, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. Like, he's there to not, like in the Christian circles he's there not to only give part of the gospel, but the complete gospel. You know?
That's amazing. And so is he there living just mostly focused on the coffee farming, or is he there also with a missional focus? Is he working with churches or anything? Is there anything like that too going on? Or
so right now he's working amongst a people group that is 99.9% Muslim. So, and I've been there many, many times. And it's very, very interesting. So when we would go out and talk with people, and they're super spiritual. So one of their first questions is like, what do you believe? They will ask
so
you.
Cool.
It's so
Don't
awesome.
you wish Americans were more like that?
I know, right? I mean, the West doesn't have that vulnerability. Like, what do you believe is something you would ask, like,
way later.
Yeah, so some people ask that, like, they marry someone and they never ask that till 5 years into their marriage.
Yeah.
But that can be one of the first questions you ask when you sit down with people. Because they want to know, but they also want to share. So when I was there, I would share, talk about my beliefs, Jesus, talk about how God has impacted my life. And they would look at me and they say, man, you're such a great Muslim. They have no concept.
Yeah,
like, the idea of Christianity is culture. It's not a way of life.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think actually that is way more true than we Christians in the West ever realize, because we think that we're just proclaiming a message about Jesus, and we don't realize how much our worship is culturally expressed and contextualized.
Yeah,
so
totally.
You have to be aware of the message and the way that your culture appropriates that message. Because if you want to proclaim Jesus effectively, you have to understand that different people will worship and receive the gospel slightly differently than you will, even though it's the same exact message, unchanged. Right. So we're not trying to make them American Christians or Russian Christians.
Right.
We have a hard time with this in the Russian church community, where we think pretty much every other cultural expression equals a heretical deviation. Right. But to realize that we are here to proclaim the good news of Jesus, that does not mean that we need to make them dress like us, talk like us, look like us in order to be real Christians.
Right.
But we're not aware of that. Maybe they are more aware of, the fact that how you worship and how you live is interconnected.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of my favorite things in especially places like Bali, and this may sound harsh, especially on a podcast, especially for Western ears, it may sound harsh, but one of their sayings is like, if you are not spiritual, then you're mentally disabled. They just don't believe in the concept that, there's spiritual and there's secular.
Right. There's no such thing.
They don't understand, for the most part, they don't have the tendencies that we have in the West to think binary. They basically think it's all together, it's all one, So, which, once again, there's pros and cons to that. I mean, there's a lot of fear
Right.
within their religion and context of belief. There's a lot of fear. They're not a love-driven people. They're more of preservation. We got to save everything. We got to make sure that we're safe. We got to appease the gods. Like sitting at a beach in Bali, and all of a sudden, in the middle, you look, there's like a ton of Australian people. Like you'll see a ton of like white people there. And then in the middle of white people, there's like this like row of people walking, like huge. I'm talking about 50 people dressed up in colorful garments, like carrying fruits, meats, and dumping them in the river and into the ocean simply to appease the tsunami gods, because it was tsunami season.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, because for us, I think in the West, we don't realize that we're always worshiping, even though we are. And because of that, we don't realize how deficient our view of the spiritual realm is, especially in a secular Pacific Northwest, you know?
Yeah.
If you were to ask that question that the guy asked you over coffee in the coffee line at Makeworth, the first question you ask somebody, who do you worship? You know, that's almost like the most offensive thing you can even ask, you
right.
know?
Yeah.
But the reality is that everyone worships. And so like as messengers of the gospel here, we need to learn to communicate that and help people see themselves better. So
Totally.
That's amazing. So for you, Mirror Coffee it's a way to do excellent work. It's a way to make an amazing product, but also in a totally holistic way that is not only making good coffee and, not only even sustaining local economy back there, but also creating a network of connection and trust and relationship between this Christian man and a Muslim population.
Right.
And he's eventually kind of, I'm guessing, like his work there, he's there as a missionary to kind of proclaim the good news, to be a witness of the gospel to the people over there.
Yeah, definitely. So he's committed to a long-term discipleship movement there.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and especially amongst people groups like those that I mentioned, it takes time.
Yeah.
If we want to make like missions a result-based kind of system, then going to places like Indonesia is like, don't waste your time.
Yeah.
It takes time. It takes incarnation. I mean, I love referring to the life of Jesus when I talk about this, because for Jesus it took time. He didn't start his ministry till his 30s.
Yeah.
And sometimes we wish that we could go to a nation that is unreached and completely say a couple of sermons and leave and it would be done.
Right.
But it literally takes living, sleeping, eating, experiencing life day to day to show and demonstrate people the way of Jesus. Because I don't think the problem is that everybody's opposed to Jesus. I just believe the problem is people don't really know who he truly is.
Right. Well, and that's definitely the case here in the West, where people have overheard the name Jesus and Christianity, and 99% of the people you talk to don't know the basic sketch of what the biblical Christian message is. They don't know.
Right.
So, and I think that's an amazing paradigm to think long term, because to be, the thing that I'm always trying to draw out in this podcast is, the narrative of following Jesus in a post-Christian culture. We're followers of Christ. It's a journey. It takes time. And our generation especially, I feel like we are so results-oriented. We are so, with our careers, with our creativity, with our relationships, with everything, with our worship, we want, we come to church and we want that boom experience of like, God has spoken to me. Life is good. I've got my coffee, I've got my church family, all is well, Right. But real discipleship takes time. Real mission takes time, whether that be in Indonesia or whether that be here,
Right.
Reaching out to people around you and proclaiming the good news. Or even, I think what I'm loving and what I'm seeing here is that embedding the reality of the gospel deep into your work. Not just on a surface, like, I think we tend to, the Christian movement, the contemporary Christian music movement, and then we got the Christian books and the Christian movies, everything is it's got this really shallow Jesus stamp on it.
Right.
It's not embedded deep. It's like, when you look at the Lord of the Rings stories, I can hardly preach a certain sermon or record a single episode without referring to Lord of the Rings. But
That's awesome.
What I love about Tolkien is that the gospel reality is so deep embedded. It's permeated in the whole story that you don't get this surface Jesus died for your sins and repent, which we need to proclaim that too.
Right.
But when you read it, you're submerged into the full beauty of what it means to look at life through a biblical lens.
Yeah, totally.
And that's complicated. That's nuanced. That takes time.
Right.
So how is the process with rolling out? When are you guys going to start selling? How can people get a hold of Mirror Coffee Roasters and follow you guys?
Yeah, so the easiest way to keep track of what we're doing, our progress, is on Instagram. That's very, very easy. We love creating content. That's also another very big passion of ours. But if you follow us on Mirror Coffee Roasters, all one word, and mirror like a mirror, like reflection mirror. So MIRROR Coffee Roasters. And you'll find us on there. We're, I think, the only company with that name.
Nice.
So it's going to be very, very easy to find. So follow us there. I think at this point, we've definitely started roasting. We've seasoned our roaster, which is super exciting. Nice. Brand new machine.
I saw pictures. That looks amazing.
Yeah, Diedrich really hooked us up, did a beautiful job. My dad built out the roastery, and Mark is there a ton, and he's definitely trying to perfect all the roast curves and all that. And as soon as we get that dialed in, and the roast curve will be selling, and we're hoping that as early as the end of this week or the beginning of next. So then we have, logistics. There's a few logistics like packaging. We have a logo and all that, obviously, on like our Instagram, but we're still trying to see, we want to make a special, basically limited edition box for the first 50.
Nice.
I think that would be really, really cool and really memorable. So we're working on that and trying to define that. But for the most part, we're full blown ahead.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think just kind of wrapping up, I think it's a unique thing to see such a strong connection between the spiritual calling of discipleship and everyday work. The simplicity of the everyday work of roasting coffee beans and making coffee, right? And I think, the challenge for a lot of young people today, especially as believers, is to connect that dot, to look at what they are doing, whether they're sitting in college classroom or flipping burgers or, interning somewhere, to see that what I am doing here matters. And it matters eternally, So I think that our generation is kind of caught trying to connect the spiritual and the physical, because the culture is so thoroughly secular that even though we don't say we're atheists, there's very few atheists, but we have a very mechanical view of reality. We don't see God present.
Yeah.
So I think this whole idea of Mirror Coffee Roaster, and I think your guys' little tagline there is the inside of the bean is what matters. Right. And so you're bringing that out. The bean itself is almost an analogy to the gospel of what God does to us.
Yeah.
Totally. And also the straight line connection between this work and a work of spiritual and relational and community building overseas. It shows you the full circle of how one ordinary job impacts other people, can impact the proclamation of the gospel, can show love, can build community, which is, I think, is a beautiful picture of, even if any of us don't have that full amazing picture, we realize that the gospel is that long-term project of embedding ourselves where we are, loving people, building relationships over a long haul. Yeah. And being a light as we tell the gospel.
Right.
So that's amazing. Hey, thank you so much for the time today. I feel like we can go on and on. We'll probably have to come back and do it again, but I really appreciate your time, and thank you guys so much for listening, for watching. This is our first video. So if you guys are listening on iTunes or whatever, this is our first video. You can check it out on YouTube. We'll have a link in our Instagram, and we'll have a link to Mirror Coffee Roasters. And send us your thoughts. Check out Mirror Coffee Roasters on Instagram. Follow us if you're not already following us. My main thing is on Instagram too, the Well Said podcast. And we'd love to hear what you thought. Share it with a friend, and we will talk to you guys again soon. Thanks.